These talks ended, of course, with no resolution. And meanwhile, all that's doing is giving the Ayatollahs more time. If they agree to Trump's conditions, that will be the worst thing that can happen, because they won't stick to them.
If America has to pull the trigger and strike against Iran, there will be legitimacy because the Iranians were given a chance to do the right thing.
A legitimacy, schlegitimacy. I hate that word.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. Today is the 18th of February. It's a Wednesday, and we are speaking the day after the meeting in Geneva between the Iranian and U.S. delegations. So a lot to unravel here. And as per usual, I'm with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom. How are we today, Ruthie? And how do you look at what happened yesterday in Geneva?
Okay, so when you ask how I am, it's a complicated answer because actually I'm getting antsy about a strike on the Islamic Republic. And I know a lot of people feel the way I do because we've been waiting for weeks now. We were anticipating it, and we see lots of movement of U.S. aircraft carriers, fighter jets. There's all kinds of movement going on. And yet these talks ended, of course, with no resolution and with just a decision that they'll have a third set of talks. And meanwhile, all that's doing is giving the Ayatollahs more time.
Because more time, at least in the short term, also helps the United States of America and all the countries that support the United States, Israel included, because it gives the United States time to move into the region more and more military assets. Specifically, everyone is talking about the aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, which is being moved. It was in operations outside Venezuela, somewhere there near Latin America, and is now on its way sailing towards the Middle East. And I think in the short term, dragging this out a little longer is not to the disadvantage of the United States or to Israel. Now, that's counterintuitive because for many years, the Iranians just want to talk, and from their point of view, just talking is good because it gets rid of the pressure. But maybe at least in the short, medium term, this delay actually suits Western interests.
For sure, that's true. But I have to say, when you look at those so-called talks in Geneva, this is after there were talks in Oman. Now, first of all, note that in Geneva, it took place, these talks took place, I believe, in the Omani embassy, and the delegations were not in the same room. That's how successful, or that's what you call peaceful negotiations. They wouldn't even sit in the same room with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. That's one thing. Meanwhile, outside of that room, the Ayatollah Khamenei was threatening on X and elsewhere and on Al Jazeera, saying, the U.S. thinks that its aircraft carriers are so strong, but they don't, we could sink those ships, something along those lines. So here you are, you're in these talks, and Tehran is threatening the U.S. with serious threats and saying, we will never give up our ballistic missile program. We will not give up everything else, etc. So now, before we continue to talk about that, it's not surprising, of course. And by the way, what we're reading is that there's a new surge of protests in the streets, albeit smaller because, you can understand those people don't want to get gunned down and slaughtered as soon as they peek their heads out of their homes. But before we talk about that, let's hear what Vice President J.D. Vance had to say about this in an interview with Martha McCallum on Fox News yesterday.
the president has all options on the table. And, one thing about the negotiation I will say this morning is, in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards. But in other ways, it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. So we're going to keep on working it. But of course, the president reserves the ability to say when he thinks that diplomacy has reached its natural end. We hope we don't get to that point. But if we do, that'll be the president's call.
Can I say, Ruthie, it's very interesting. On the day of the talks, the Iranians walked out of the room and they said, great talks, where we have some understandings on some, general issues. There's hope here. We've got to keep talking. This is good. And for a while, Washington said nothing. Okay, nothing at all. And in many ways, this was not to be unexpected because once again, we said a moment ago, the Iranians are under a threat of the United States of America, and they want to reduce the threat, and they want to say, yes, these talks are promising, and they talk it up without actually giving anything substantive. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and only hours afterwards, not the president, but the vice president gave that interview that we just saw to Fox News, and he wanted to send a message. And he wanted to send a message that from the administration's perspective, okay, we had a round. They were inconclusive. Maybe this will work. We're willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. There are still significant gaps. He said the Iranians are not meeting Trump's red lines. And if this doesn't work, we have another option. And you said very correctly, well, while these talks are going on, the Iranians are threatening to destroy American warships, to attack and sink American aircraft carriers. But to be fair, America is also shaking a stick by moving all these forces to the region, threatening the Iranians, saying either you agree to our red lines, you agree to our deal, or else. And I would ask you, yes, I would ask everyone who's watching or listening to our program, whose threat is more realistic? Whose threat is more credible? And the answer is, it's clear that the Iranians are just doing bravado, and it's not realistic. Yeah, the chances of them actually having a successful hit on a U.S. aircraft carrier are minute. But what are the chances of all those American military assets in the region actually bringing real pain to the Islamic Republic, to that regime, to its leadership, to its infrastructure, and so forth? Yes, that is very, very real. And so I think that is the background noise for the talks. But the essential American message, which was repeated here by the vice president, was clear. Either you meet the red lines of the United States of America regarding the nuclear program and so forth, and we can talk about it later because it was very interesting how he answered some of the other questions, I thought, the vice president. But I think it's very clear. The game is very clear. Either Iran meets the Americans' red line, and it's not clear that they can or they will or they want to, or those military assets will be used very effectively against the Iranian regime.
The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15 to 17 at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Register today at jns-summit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV. That is JNSTV, one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem. I want to stress again, I know I keep sounding like a broken record on our broadcast, but I really want to say this on behalf of the Iranian people. I know that it's common to say, the Iranians will agree, not agree. I really make a point of stressing that we're not talking about the Iranians, we're talking about the Ayatollahs, or you could say the Islamic Republic. And so I don't say the Iranians are doing this, the Iranians are doing that. I want to make a distinction on behalf of the Iranian people, and we want them to be free, and we want them to get out from under that disgusting regime that is a threat to them and a threat to Israel and the United States, the whole world. Okay. Now, you're absolutely right that the U.S. threat is more credible because even the Ayatollahs know that they're no match for the might of the United States of America. And now even the whole world knows that the Islamic Republic is more of a paper tiger than had been imagined, as we saw in the 12-Day War. For years, everybody said in America, in Israel, everywhere, you don't poke that bear because you never know. They can wipe Israel off the map, or they can they've got nukes and they've got ballistic missiles, or they're enriching uranium enough to put on warheads, etc. And then we saw that actually they were a lot weaker and it was easier to take out their nuclear facilities than anybody had thought. Having said that, the strength of Islamists against the West is not in their weapons. It's in their mind frame and their understanding that the West believes that everybody just wants peace, quiet, affluence, and for everybody to get along and to have free and fair elections. And it's a lie. It's not true. And they know it. And this is one of the problems Israel has with fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. The one thing the Islamists know, and I would like to say while on that point, is that we just entered the month of Ramadan. And it's crucial because we're hearing rumors, again, we don't know if it's true, it may not be true, that the United States is thinking of giving the Ayatollahs a deadline of a month to either sign a deal or not, all right? And then I say, well, what is that month? It's the month of Ramadan. And again, the West takes that kind of thing into account when the enemies, the Islamist enemies, never do. They, on the contrary, we saw on October 7th, Hamas aimed at us on a Jewish holiday. The same thing with the Yom Kippur War, the same thing. So here I just want to say the Islamists have a strength that the West does not have.
Can I respond in a number of ways? First of all, on the Ramadan issue, it was said, I remember, and we're both old enough to remember 9/11 and the attacks on New York and Washington by Al-Qaeda. And America wanted to respond and hit back against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And they said America can't attack during Ramadan. And guess what? The United States attacked during Ramadan. And to be fair, always in Ramadan, the Israeli security apparatus has to be on higher alert because we know Ramadan is more prone to attacks. And I would say to the Muslim extremists, what? You're allowed to attack us on Ramadan and we're not allowed to attack you, or we can't defend ourselves. And so I think the whole Ramadan issue, to use a bad metaphor, is a bit of a red herring from the point of view of we can't attack you on Ramadan, right? They have never done Ramadan ceasefires against us. The famous Yom Kippur War, they used to call it the Ramadan War when they attacked us in October 1973. That's the first point. Second point about does the West understand who these Islamists are? So we heard that very clearly from the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, at the Munich Security Conference, where he talked about a regime that was headed by Ayatollahs, about Islamist extremists who've got this world outlook and what they believe. And so I don't know about other administrations. Yes, we can debate about Obama and debate about Biden and so forth. But I have a sense that important people in this administration have no illusions whatsoever about the nature of the Iranian regime. The Secretary of State said it very openly, and I don't think he'd say things that the president didn't agree with. And I think it's very clear that there is an understanding in this particular administration that, this regime is a problematic regime from its very basic element, right? This is a regime steeped in this ideology of exporting the Islamic Revolution. As Henry Kissinger famously said, the problem with Iran is it's not a country, it's a cause. And that cause has been the export of the Khomeini Revolution across the Middle East and beyond, right? Final point. Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a very important speech this week before the Conference of Presidents, where he expressed, and he said openly, I'm skeptical if a deal is possible. And I agree with him. I'm skeptical if the Iranians can ever possibly meet, I'll correct myself, the Iranian regime can ever possibly meet the American red lines. And it's right to be skeptical, right? But nevertheless, Netanyahu went on and said, what do we need for this to be a good deal on the assumption that the Iranians are willing to play ball? On the nuclear issue, he said two very interesting things, indistinct from the deal that Obama did 10 years ago now. Number one, he said all the enriched uranium left in Iran, remaining in Iran since the strikes of last June, all of that has to be removed from Iran. Right? There can be no enriched uranium less in Iran because with enriched uranium, you can make nuclear weapons. And the second thing he said, which is in many ways equally important, if not more important, he said that Iran has to be denied the capability to enrich any uranium. Because the Obama deal left them with the technology to enrich uranium, but it agreed to, so-called agreed to, lower levels, non-military use weapons in the low percentages. What is the problem? It's the same technology you use for low enrichment, for higher grade enrichment. It's you just said how many times you spin the centrifuge, right? And so what Netanyahu said is if you want to do a deal, you have to dismantle, deny the Iranians all enrichment capability. Now, the truth is most countries that use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, whether it's Canada or Germany or Japan, they actually don't have their own enrichment. They buy their enriched uranium from other countries. And so there's no need for a peaceful nuclear program that the Iranians mendaciously say, yes, they lie about it openly, yes. They say, we only want a peaceful program, so you don't need enrichment. Call their bluff. And so Netanyahu stressed that you need these two elements in any deal for it to work.
Right. But I would take issue with Netanyahu and you and President Trump. There is no such thing as a good deal with them. None of the conditions, and the reason is, even if the Ayatollahs agreed to all those conditions, which they won't, but let's suppose by some miracle they did.
Not by miracle, but because the Americans have got their...
No, they would lie. They would lie. It is part of their culture. It is even in Islam, there are concepts about that. It's okay to lie when you need to achieve your goals. And so no deal would be a good deal. That's number one. But if there were, and another reason is that if there were such a deal, that would mean removing sanctions. That would mean money in their coffers. And by the way, when you said that other countries provide enriched uranium, that's not the only thing they provide. We know also China, North Korea, and Russia are aiding and abetting the Ayatollahs. There is a really dangerous geopolitical issue going on, but it's not just geopolitical. The Iranian regime is religious. Now, it's interesting because I have a friend, actually we have a common friend, who said to me, the reason I'm nervous about this, whether there's a deal, there's not a deal, military action, not military action, that regime is so ideological and even suicidal to the point of if you believe in the afterlife and the 12th imam going up to heaven, to paradise, and that is that she said they could pull a Hail Mary pass and say, okay, well, if we're on the way out, now what we can do is just fire off the weapons we do have, the missiles we do have. We can hit Tel Aviv. We can hit Europe. They could just empty out their arsenal in order to, say, okay, that's a last hurrah. Because if we're going to go down, we won't go down without killing huge amounts of people, Jews, Christians, infidel, Muslims, etc.
So, first of all, I'd like to see regime change in Iran. I think we all would. First and foremost, the Iranian people want to see this terrible regime thrown out, yes? The question, is that likely to happen anytime soon? And if there is a chance for a good deal, yes, with the regime, should we throw it away on the hope that somehow the regime's going to fall sometimes soon? And that's a difficult question in my mind to answer. And we have to, I think very carefully about in the world of decision making, not using, if you feel now, right, and it's a question mark, but if you feel now that there's an opportunity to force the Iranians to accept a deal that they've never accepted in the last 30 years, do you say, no, we're not going to use that opportunity now in order to wait for the Iranian people to rise up? Because everywhere in the West, everyone says, it's not going to be like Saddam and in Iraq, yes? Everyone says the Iranian people have to do this by themselves. Now, that the Iranian people want to overthrow their regime, everyone agrees. That's of course. Do they have the power to do so? And what we saw, and you said it yourself, we're seeing now a certain amount of renewed demonstrations because it's the 40 days since the people were killed in that big range, the big massacre that happened in Iran. And yet it's much less than before because the Iranian regime is so brutal and it has killed and massacred its own people and is willing to do so again to stay in power. And so the question is, on the possibility, not probability, on the possibility that the Iranian people are actually going to overthrow their regime, do you say no to a deal? Now, you will say correctly, okay? But a deal will give sanctions relief to the Iranians, and that will give blood to the regime, and it will help the regime survive because a lot of the people demonstrating are demonstrating for economic reasons because the regime has brought economic havoc upon the economy of Iran, and the people there, their money's worthless, and there's no jobs, and the country's falling apart economically, and sanctions relief will save the regime, and there's truth in that argument. But if you made the deal with the Iranians on the assumption that there's no automatic sanctions relief, and I know this is something I believe Israelis have said to Americans, if you say there's no automatic sanctions relief, that there's only relief when you actually move on the difficult lifting that you have to do. In other words, it's not enough that you sign the agreement and smile, and the Iranians are very good at signing agreements and smiling, yes? But you only get sanctions relief on the basis of implementation. You move out 1,000, I don't know, whatever it is, units of highly enriched uranium, and that goes to a third country and it's off Iranian territory, only then you get sanctions relief. When we have proof that you've dismantled centrifuges, you get sanctions relief. In other words, it's only in response to the specific implementation of Iranian promises to dismantle their nuclear program.
Yes, but that's a pipe dream, okay? First of all, you keep saying, well, if they dismantle this and dismantle that. That's not the only issue with the Islamist regime in Tehran. The issue, and you say, if there is any deal that is signed, you can forget about the Iranian people rising up to take over that regime. You can forget about it. The only way they'll do it, it's true, they have to do it, but they were expecting, and they were promised by President Trump, that they would do their part, and the U.S. and Israel would do, their part, and together that would topple the regime. Now, you mentioned that, if there's money in their coffers, then, a part of the reason that people are protesting is that there's no money. And that's true. But that money never goes to the Iranian people. It goes to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias. That's one of the reasons that the Iranian people were getting fed up. Many of the reasons was, you care about the Palestinians. What about us? What about our lives? So, but again, I'm saying, if there's a deal, any deal, there will be no regime change, number one. And number two, there's the deal it would make if they were to change their entire character, the Ayatollahs, they wouldn't be them, okay? To say, well, if they do something else, then it'll be fine. In other words, it can't happen because they haven't changed. And by the way, they say so. They where they lie is about their intentions for nuclear weapons, but they don't lie about whom they want to kill. In fact, a few days ago, when they were celebrating the anniversary of the Islamist revolution, they had the names of American generals on missiles and on coffins. And they're not making any bones about it. Plus, they always say, we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And so there is no change there. So no deal. The only thing a deal will do, whatever's in that deal, will mean that the Iranian people were abandoned just as they were by Obama and, of course, by Biden, but especially by Obama. They were abandoned when they took to the streets and were gunned down then. And I'm really hoping, and this is my message to President Trump, do not follow the last person in the world whose footsteps you want to follow, and is Obama.
So I'll say the following. If you are correct, okay, and this regime is incapable of meeting the American red lines, right, then we don't have a problem. There's no reason for us to argue. If you are correct, then that means America is moving all these forces into the area, and it will be forced to use them because the Iranians won't agree to Trump's red lines. I'm raising the theoretical possibility, and maybe it's a hope that the Trump administration has, that because of their uniquely vulnerable and weak position, the economy, and their own internal issues, which are very extreme in Iran. Yes, their people rose up and they had to squash them with force. The regime is weaker than ever before. And of course, its military and its proxies, because of what's happened since October 7th, yes, it's weaker regionally, it's weaker militarily, it's weaker technologically. It is in a uniquely weak position. And that there is a chance, I'm not saying a certainty, that they will agree to things they've never agreed to before. Now, having said that, I know you could be right. They could not agree. But if they don't agree, we've used the time to move all the forces to the Middle East. And I want to say two things, which is very interesting, I think. You know, your friends, the Europeans, I say that cynically, of course, they're not your friends, right? But often in the past, the Europeans would be proposing, let's calm things down. And some European diplomat, a Frenchman or a German or a Brit would be acting as an intermediary in this and being the do-gooder trying to calm things down. The Europeans have shut up. In other words, they're letting America lead on this. Very interesting. In other words, they don't want to undermine Trump's chances of forcing the Iranians to get a deal or else, and they haven't come out against the or else either. At the same time, and here you follow these things much more than me, but I remember in the lead up to the war in June, when Israel was fighting Iran alone during the first 10 days of the 12-day war, before Midnight Hammer, there was this whole debate in America about we should stay out of it. This is Israel's war. We can't let Israel drag America into a war, right? And there were people, very notable people in American public life who were saying that. My impression is that that conversation, yes, don't let Israel drag us into war. Everyone sees that Washington, that President Trump is leading this, and that conversation sort of gone away. In other words, precisely because the United States has put this diplomatic option on the table, precisely because they've put clear red lines on the table, it has, from a utilitarian point of view, yes, that if America has to pull the trigger and strike against Iran, there will be legitimacy because the Iranians were given a chance to do the right thing.
Okay, first of all, legitimacy, schlegitimacy. I hate that word. It's somehow always the moral forces in the world are seeking legitimacy from immoral ones. And so it really gets on my nerves. But put that aside for a minute and let me just correct you for 1 second. It's not that I said that I'm doubtful there could be a good deal, or that if they don't agree to the red lines. What I'm saying is they might agree, but it won't mean anything. You better hope they don't agree to Trump's terms. He says they want a deal. Of course they want a deal. Of course they want a deal. They don't want military action against themselves because they know they'll lose. Okay. Second of all, and so what I'm saying is they may come around and fake out to buy more time, as they always do. And let's just hope that, and I don't think Trump is someone, who is going to let them pull the wool over his eyes. But I'm saying there is that Western tendency. And in Trump's case, it's also an additional tendency to say, when you're strong in a deal, you can make a deal. And especially if they are weak, which they are, as you said, it's precisely because they're that weakened that this is the time to strike, not to deal. And if they agree, to Trump's conditions, that will be the worst thing that can happen because they won't stick to them. And by the time, the International Atomic Energy Agency sends inspectors in, and then they don't let them in, and they do let them in, you've bought more time and more time. That's one thing. Second of all, it is not true that in America, those voices of "you're all doing this for Israel" have quieted down. They've just come in full force from the groypers in the Republican Party and the leftists and the right wingers like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, even now, unfortunately, Megyn Kelly, who yes, say we're doing this for Israel, and Israel is getting us into this, and Jews are getting us into this. So those voices are still there, but we've got to ignore those voices. And thank God, I think so far President Trump has said there's no room in the Republican Party for anti-Semitism, etc. So anyway, my point is not, well, if they don't agree to the red lines, then no. We don't want them to agree, because if they do, then we are really screwed.
So I will respond. Netanyahu spent time in his speech talking about what needs to be in a deal, though he said he was skeptical, and he said it very strongly that he's skeptical that a deal is possible. But if there is going to be a deal, what needs? And I spoke a moment ago about what needs to be on the nuclear side. He also mentioned the ballistic missile side, right? And he talked about there's this international convention where countries can sign up to, but it limits the warhead and the range of the missiles that they can have, right? Or that they can trade with and so forth. And so he talked about that. And then, of course, there's the terror issue, the proxy issue. And I'll give a theoretical thing that would be a challenge for Israel. What happens if Trump can get a deal that is near perfect on the nuclear issue, but leaves the other two issues unanswered? And what should Israel's response then be? Because I think if I heard the J.D. Vance interview on Fox and the whole interview, he was very clear on the nuclear issue. We won't allow them down. On the other issues, he was a little more, he says, we don't want them to. He used words that were less strong. When he used the term red lines, I think he was referring to the nuclear issue. And so is it a dilemma for Israel that you'll get a good deal on the nuclear issue, but which will also play lip service to or ignore the other issues? And I think that's a possibility. And then Israel has to ask itself, what do we do in a situation like that? Do we come out against the deal? I have a solution. I would offer the following solution, that we don't necessarily in that case have to come out against the deal, but there has to be an Israeli-American public understanding, and maybe, as I said very, very publicly, that Israel reserves the right to take any action it requires to defend itself, because maybe once the nuclear issue is put aside, we have no trouble dealing with the ballistic missile problem and other problems with Iran. The issues of the proxies, which used to be something we talked about a lot, which is their terror proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen and so forth. I think for the most part, because of what's happened over the last two and a bit years since October 7th, yes, I think those proxies are a shadow of their former selves, and that once again, maybe that battle's been half won already.
Well, they are shadows of their former selves, and this will be for another podcast, but they're also rebuilding. I mean, it's mixed, a double-edged sword here, so to speak. No pun intended. Yes, when you ask me, first of all, as I said, there is no good deal. I don't care. They agree to this, that, the other thing. Whatever they agree to, they won't stick to it, as we know. And so when Netanyahu says that, that's fine. When you ask me, well, then the question is, if some deal is signed, first of all, as I said, I don't care what's in that deal. Nukes, not nukes, proxies, it won't work. And all it does is buy the regime time. If you say, what will Israel do? Israel, as you said, reserves the right. You say defend itself. It has to reserve the right to preempt so that it's not a sitting duck as it was on
I
October
don't
7th.
disagree with that. I agree
Right.
with that.
In other words, it's not enough to say, look, they attacked us, so we retaliate. No. And I trust, I hope I can trust us to do what is necessary. Though, yes, I agree that this should be the United States with help from Israel and not the other way around. Because although at this point, to tell you the truth, I don't care what anti-Zionist, anti-Semites, Jew haters say about Israel dragging the U.S. into. I don't care what they say anymore. They are liars. They are wrong, and we shouldn't take them into account at all.
So we are coming to the end of our program. I want to just end with one sentence and say the following. You are 100% correct, like Prime Minister Netanyahu is, to be very skeptical about any deal done with the Iranians, because we know the track record of this regime and how the Iranian regime operates and how they could be just, they'll say, well, Trump is president, we'll be nice guys and smile. And the minute someone else comes into the White House who's a different personality, maybe a touch more dovish, maybe all sorts, we'll just buy time. And I think it's good to be skeptical. And that's why the idea is you only get sanctions relief precisely when you deliver. I think that's the important part. But just as we should be skeptical and careful with a deal, I think we also need to be skeptical and careful with military operations, because to see military strikes as giving an automatic panacea for a perfect solution, we know in the past, whether it was in different parts of the world, at least I would say the following. We need to be critical and look very carefully at any diplomatic solution, but we also have to think through very carefully any military action. What are the possible positive consequences, but what are the possible negative consequences? That's all I'm saying. I think that is an obligation of policymakers everywhere. In this case, it's specifically an obligation of policymakers in Washington and Jerusalem.
Yes, and just to end, in conclusion, I would say, yes, Israel and America are weighing and have been all along very carefully weighing military action, the consequences, etc. There, I don't doubt for a second. Okay, it's the diplomacy part that I say is a no-no. The weighing military action, of course, and knowing what you can achieve and what you can't and which weapons are needed. And I'm no military expert, but I know that that's what's going on. It's the diplomacy part that I wish were not going on right now.
So with those thoughts, and as we've said, I think almost every week for the last 2 months now, we will see what the coming week brings. But until then, Ruthie, I look forward to speaking with you next week.
So do I. And I'd just like to say, anybody who has been enjoying our content, could you please like and subscribe? And we'll see you next week.